guys, this week in history, on July 19th and 20th, a very important convention took place in Seneca Falls, New York, that changed the history of America and possibly the rest of the world as well. So to celebrate that, today I wanted to tell you a few of the events that led up to this convention and quite a bit that followed it. In 1840, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott met in London at the World Anti-Slavery Convention. At this convention, the two women were refused seats simply because of their gender. And this is when they started talking about holding another convention about gender. And that later ended up being the Seneca Falls Convention in New York in 1848. Around 300 people attended the Seneca Falls Convention, and some notable people include Frederick Douglass, who was a famous abolitionist. If you've never heard of him, but I'd be surprised if you haven't. He's pretty famous. Other than him, the convention was attended by some other men and quite a few women, and most of them had become politically aware during the abolitionist movement. At this convention, Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote the Declaration of Sentiments that was a mirror image of the Declaration of Independence, except it was, instead of declaring freedom for Britain, it was declaring freedom and rights for women. This declaration was signed by 68 women and 32 men at the Seneca Falls Convention. 2 weeks after this, the Rochester Women's Rights Convention was held on August 2nd in Rochester, New York. In 1850, another convention, the National Women's Rights Convention, was held in Worcester, Massachusetts. From this point on, up until the Civil War, women's rights conventions were held fairly regularly. But during the Civil War, they were not, for obvious reasons such as nobody having time for that kind of thing. After the Civil War, in 1866, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony created the American Equal Rights Association to work towards a common goal of suffrage for all women, despite color. 3 years after this, in 1869, Wyoming became the first U.S. territory to grant women suffrage. On September 6th of 1870, Louisa Ann Swain became the first woman in the U.S. to vote. She cast her ballot in Laramie, Wyoming, and that's pretty much the only cool thing that has ever happened in Wyoming. No offense to anybody from Wyoming, but it's just kind of a lot of wind and Yellowstone. And that, so kudos to you. After Wyoming became the first state to let women vote between the years of 1910 and 1918, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Michigan, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New York, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Dakota, and Washington all granted women suffrage. In 1872, the year that Ulysses S. Grant was running for the presidency, both Susan B. Anthony and Sojourner Truth attempted to vote, and both were denied because it wasn't legal yet, sadly. Also in the same year of 1872, Victoria Woodhull became the first woman ever to run for the presidency. Obviously she didn't win or get very far, considering no women could vote yet, because nobody thought they were capable of even voting. So of course they wouldn't think a woman was capable of the presidency, but it showed that women were serious. 6 years later, in 1878, the Women's Suffrage Amendment was introduced to Congress, but did not pass. Fast forward to 1913, the year Woodrow Wilson became president. On the eve of his inauguration, there was a women's suffrage parade in the Capitol, which ended in hundreds of injured women. That same year, Alice Paul formed the Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage, which later became the National Women's Party. Alice Paul is especially known for picketing the White House and being jailed multiple times. Margaret Higgins Sanger was an early sex educator, writer, nurse, and one of the first people to advocate for birth control. In 1966, she opened the first birth control clinic in the U.S., and she later created organizations which evolved into Planned Parenthood. So that's really cool and somebody I've personally never heard of. Up until 1918, Woodrow Wilson was against women's suffrage, but in 1918 he luckily changed his mind, partly because of the role that women had played in World War I for the war effort. And then on May 21st, 1919, the U.S. Representative James R. Mann, who was a Republican senator from Illinois and the chairman of the suffrage committee, proposed to the House to approve Susan B. Anthony's women's suffrage amendment. It passed 304 to 89, which was 42 votes over the two-third majority that they needed for it to pass there. On June 4th, the Senate passed it by 56 to 25, which was only 2 votes over what was needed to make it pass by that two-thirds majority. Only 6 days into the ratification cycle where the states had to ratify it, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin already had. And by June 16th, Kansas, New York, and Ohio had as well. And by March of 1920, 35 states had ratified the 19th Amendment, but they were one state away from getting the 2/3 majority of the states needed to make it pass. But the problem was that it was mostly the southern states left, and they all did not want it to pass. So it was left on Tennessee's shoulders to be the swing vote, and they voted with a 48-48, so it was completely tied. So the one person who was left to vote and would have complete say in whether or not the 19th Amendment passed was 23-year-old Harry T. Byrne. He was originally against the 19th Amendment, but his mother wrote him a letter telling him to vote yes on it. And that actually changed his mind, and without that letter, the 19th Amendment wouldn't have passed. The very last state to ratify the amendment was actually Mississippi, and it was only ratified on March 22nd, 1984. That is scarily recent. And so, in 1920, on August 18th, the 19th Amendment was ratified, finally giving women the right to vote. That year, on November 2nd, 8 million women turned up and got to vote for the first time because of the amendment passing. Okay, just a disclaimer, I know I did leave out some things, some major groups of people, some major organizations and stuff that happened in this time period of first wave feminism, but I only have so long to talk. Maybe I'll do another video on it someday, and maybe I'll talk about other waves of feminism, or talk more specifically about specific people. But if you liked this video and want more, give it a big thumbs up, and to see more videos like this one, you can click here to subscribe to me, and you can click here to see my last video, and I'll see you guys all next time. Bye!